Hi, and again, this is a ScentTech Talks series. This series is supported by Latvian government and via Latvian Investment and Development Agency and Norway via Norway Grants as part of the bigger project, which is called Scent Recorder as Emotional Wellbeing. And within this program, within this grant, we need to develop this scent recorder or scent camera, which allow users to record, store, and release scents, as well as to do information events regarding this technology and ScentTech Talks in general. And within this ScentTech Talks, I have a pleasure to interview today Kai-Markus Mueller from Volkswagen University. Hi, Kai.
Hi, Sandris.
Can you give a short introduction of yourself?
I'm a neuroscientist by training. I have a PhD in neurophysiology. After my PhD, I spent a few years in management consulting. Afterwards, I founded my own startup, a startup that used neurotechnology for marketing research. More specifically, we used EEG brainwaves and reaction time research to identify the optimal price for a product, and basically developed a bunch of new and innovative market research tools. And since 2017, I've been professor of consumer behavior at Villingen University. And my algorithms and my technology called neuropricing has been transferred to the Dutch consumer neuroscience agency, Neurensics.
And can you just a little bit tell about, because I saw that you are involved in the project of using fMRIs, right? And detecting emotions and etc. Can you just elaborate methods and methodology and how it could be used, for example, in scent researchers?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back one step and think about if we ask people about something, let's say a product. This could be a scent camera, or it could be any product. You get an answer. Now, the problem is people say one thing, but they do something else. People say one thing, but they feel something else. And they have a hard time understanding their own feelings and understanding their future intentions. That is why neuroscience is a very good tool to understand what is going on non-consciously or pre-consciously in the brain. And these measures are indeed very good predictors of future behavior, and they're indeed very good measures of what people are going to do in futures. So that has, for example, been demonstrated in pop songs, a very emotional topic. Like, what kind of music do you like? People say one thing, but then they dance to another music, or they buy another piece of music on iTunes. It's been shown, for example, that fMRI brain scans, that is the big white tube that you use for putting subjects in and people in and measuring their brain activity. You may have seen these colored brain pictures, colored pictures and brain slices. Well, that technology is very good for measuring what people actually feel and what their intentions are, whether they like something, they would potentially even like to purchase something, or whether they, for example, like a pop song. And it turns out that the fMRI measures are much, much better predictors of whether people like a pop song or whether they don't like it. And that is, of course, much better than the questionnaire. So, being said, and that knowing all that, two amazing scientists from the University of Amsterdam, Victor Lame and Stefan Scholte, both brain scientists, they've developed a tool that correlates brain activity with what we feel, with emotions. And they can identify, only based on brain activity, 13 different emotions. Amongst them, positive ones like value, expectation, desire, lust, trust, and personal involvement, like familiarity, or just involvement. Does this product involve me? Or does this advertisement involve me? Or potentially, in our case here, does that smell involve me? Does that fragrance involve me? Negative ones like fear, anger, disgust, very important for our case here for the sensory system of smell, and more cognitive emotions like attention or novelty. And the goal here is that we don't only use this for marketing stimuli, for which it is used now, but also for measures of what kind of olfactory stimulation leads to which emotions, which fragrance is perceived to be trustworthy, involving, disgusting, annoying, etc.
And what do you think are the most significant scientific discoveries regarding scent in your field, right?
Depends a little bit on who you ask, obviously. There have been even Nobel Prizes won for molecular structures, neuroscientific structures, but that may be a bit beyond the scope of this podcast and also beyond my expertise, because I'm more a cognitive scientist. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist. So what fascinates me personally is this relationship between scent and emotion. For example, people believe that they could give up their sense of smell easily and they wouldn't bother them. It turns out that when people lose their sense of smell, they have a tendency, for example, to be depressed for longer time than when people lose their eyesight. Like, as a healthy person, this is hard to imagine, but this is what the data show. And so this relationship between emotions and sense is very striking. Particularly, again, here we see the discrepancy between what people say and think and how important that sense actually really is. There's a very funny investigation where people supposedly young people would rather give up their sense of smell than one of their social media accounts. And it turns out that this is, of course, completely ridiculous from a scientific perspective, because the sense of smell is much, much more important to your mental well-being and to your happiness than a social media account, which probably is not, even for a healthy person, not particularly good for their mental well-being.
And what are things which, like, let's say, scientists like you, right, who are neuroscientists who are more involved in cognitive research, what they would like to discover, right, still regarding scents?
Well, there are quite a bunch of things, I think, that we would like to discover. One of them being, from the evolutionary perspective, what are the evolutionary functions, and what have been the evolutionary functions in the past, and which are these functions that are still preserved, that probably act non-consciously on us. For example, what is the role of smell in the choice of my partner? What is the role of smell in loving my children? What is the role of smell in generally sexual selection, in perceiving fear from others? None of these things happen on a conscious level. However, there are a bunch of very, very promising studies that show that there is a correspondence between the olfactory stimulation and our choices and our perceptions and behaviors. For instance, if you smell a sweaty t-shirt of someone of the opposite sex, you can non-consciously tell whether they would be an attractive partner, and that is based on the on the compatibility, on the genetic compatibility, and the likelihood of getting robust children together, basically. So I think that's really, really fascinating. And I actually recognize that when I give my introductory psychology course at university, everybody knows about visual illusions, everybody knows about learning, but hardly anybody knows about smell, but it's really a fascinating topic.
And this Nobel Prize, or no, which you mentioned, as I understand, was given only this century, and basically for research which was done on middle or late 90s. Why it's so? Why is this, to your opinion, why is this scent, researching scent as a sense is, let's say, only become more widespread in the last 30 years, right? Comparing visuals, which we are, I think, more than century large tradition.
That's a great question. You know, auditory stimulation and visual stimulation can be explained in relatively simple physical terms. We know, light waves. That's been known for many years, and how light waves then relate to perception of, say, a color. That is something you can describe straightforward, simply psychophysically. Same with auditory stimulation. It's air pressure waves, and you can describe them, and the way they stimulate the inner ear is a relatively straightforward thing. Now, what happens in the brain is relatively complicated. And that's what's been fascinating people a lot. Now, in smell, it's a little bit different, because in smell, actually, the sensory stimulation is very complicated, and what it does to the brain is rather simple. So we have about 400 different molecules or molecular receptors in our olfactory system that these chemicals can bind to, and that can then lead to different emotions. But in the end, it leads to a few very basic emotions, like liking someone, being disgusted by something because it smells bad, say bad food, for example. These are very basic evolutionary stimuli that either make us approach something or stay away from something.
And what is role, right? What is role of sense in human perception? You said one is emotion,
as I said,
one is emotion.
Yeah, as I said, this is one of the big mysteries. One thing that is very different in the sense of smell from the other major senses is that most of the other senses go through the thalamus in the brain. So they go through a relay station, and then they're being processed in the cortex. And the cortex is basically that area of the brain that processes logical stuff, so to say. Now, more primitively, the olfactory stimulation goes directly into the emotional centers of our mental system, and there makes us act. For example, makes us like food, makes us dislike potentially harmful stimuli, and leads to immediate reactions. I have a garden out there, and some things smell wonderful, and sometimes there is a neighbor cat that leaves disgusting things, and then it's very viscerally disgusting. And when I put away the dirty stuff, I don't even want to breathe because it's so aversive, and that's very different from our other systems. You can hear aversive noise, or you can see something that is disgusting. It doesn't affect you that much, not at all, right? But smell and potentially related, our sense of taste, they lead to immediate reactions, and immediately like, okay, I stay away from this. This is potentially harmful. Or I approach this smells like very good food, for example.
And have you noticed some interesting things about yourself, right? What some examples of how scent impacts your perception?
Well, as a scientist, you always a little more maybe conscious. As a cognitive scientist, you're always a bit more conscious of such stimuli, and that there's potentially a visceral reaction. Something that I find also very interesting about oneself is that no one is disgusted by themselves. If you feel like, oh, I was working all day and I didn't get the chance to shower, and my clothes are quite smelly. If it's your own clothes, there's not such a strong emotional connection to it. But if it's someone else's clothes, it's really disgusting. So that is, again, something that I think is, there's a lot of space for very, very interesting research out there that we need to understand better.
And if there would be opportunity, right, to record the stunts similarly like we record audio-visual stimulus, right? Then the question is, if we need, and why humanity needs such mediums for stunts.
I think it would be great to have that. Because, why is that? Because we are multisensory animals, and reducing us only to hearing or seeing, that really leaves out a big space of our perceptual world. You see, all our senses interact. So only hearing something, or only seeing something, or only smelling something, is very interesting. But in combination, I think in the long run, in combination, this would be very attractive. So if I could, for example, show you a picture of a beautiful rose and say, hey, look, this is what it smells like, I think, then we get a very good perception of reality. And I think this would be very interesting. Also, I think that different cultures have different smells. When you think about, I was on food markets in Taiwan, for example, it's very characteristic. And of course, I can only tell people or describe it, but I would love to bring it with me. I would love to show this to my family, my children, my parents, my wife, whoever, my friends, and say, wow, this is a very, very different culture. And I can show them maybe a picture, or I can play a song on the radio from that culture. But it lacks an essential part of our human perception if I cannot bring the sense of smell with me.
If you would have opportunity, right, to record stunts, to play them later, what would be the first stunt which you would record with stunt on?
What would be the first thing? Oh, that's a good question. It depends a little bit on how long things can be stored. But I have 2 children. And as babies, they smell very particular, and I think this is something that actually has gotten lost now. Now they're in elementary school, in kindergarten, and that's probably lost forever. So I think this would be something the smell of your kids, that it would be wonderful to be able to preserve it digitally potentially, or at least in the current hardware version of the Scent camera.
Yes, and very nice. And last question, right? How you see what could be the main use cases for a Scent camera?
That's a great question. I see some use cases in specific niches, like potentially in medical application or in flavor and fragrance research. But I think the breakthrough will be there once this becomes a consumer product. And once, as consumers, we all have it, we use it, like drones, for example. It's 10 years ago, nobody had drones. Now it's a common consumer product. People use it, they love it. And this is something that would be wonderful if we could have that kind of distribution in the population for a Scent camera.
Thank you very much, Kai, for our talk.
Sure, thank you for inviting me here. It was really cool.